Christmas always smelled like cinnamon in my mother's house. The scent clung to the curtains, the worn carpet, even the old photo albums stacked on the coffee table. This year, though, things were different. I wasn't the girl quietly slipping away to wash the dishes while everyone else laughed in the living room. I was engaged now, standing beside David, the man who had seen every jagged corner of me and still said yes. The fire crackled, my mother hummed to herself, and for a moment I thought maybe, just maybe, this year would be easy. Then Mom carried out the albums, stacked high in her arms like treasures she had been waiting to unveil. Everyone gathered around, flipping pages filled with school plays, summer vacations, and birthday parties. David leaned in, his arm brushing against mine, his smile warm as he studied each photograph. Until it wasn't. His brow furrowed. His fingers froze on the glossy page. "Wait," he said slowly, his voice cutting through the holiday chatter. "Where's Emily?" The room fell quiet. I swallowed hard. He turned toward me, confusion in his eyes, then back at the album. "You weren't there. They lied to you." The words landed like ice water down my spine. My breath caught. My palms went cold. The room seemed smaller, the air heavier. Because in that moment, with David's voice echoing against the crackle of the fire, I realized something terrifying. Maybe he was right. Maybe the stories I'd been told about my own childhood were just stories. And suddenly, the Christmas lights didn't feel warm anymore. I was 15 the first time I realized how easy it was for my family to erase me. It wasn't in a big, dramatic way, no screaming fight, no slammed doors. It was smaller than that. Quieter. The kind of moment that sinks under your skin and stays there forever. We were sitting around the dinner table, my parents reminiscing about our family trip to the Grand Canyon. My older brother, Jacob, laughed about nearly dropping his ice cream cone into the canyon. My sister, Hannah, rolled her eyes, reminding him of the sunburn he got on his nose. The table shook with laughter, forks tapping against plates. I remember setting my fork down, staring at them. "I was there too," I said softly, half smiling, waiting for someone to nod, to confirm. But my father just kept cutting into his steak. My mother frowned as if I'd interrupted something important. "No, honey, you weren't. That was before you were born." Before I was born? I was 15. I remembered standing on that edge, feeling the wind whip my hair, clutching the rail so tight my knuckles turned white. But when I tried to insist, my voice trembled, hands shaking as I gripped my napkin. "No, I was there. I remember." "Emily," Mom cut me off sharply. "Don't start. You always imagine things. Don't make a scene." The sting in my chest was sharp, but the silence that followed was worse. My siblings avoided my eyes, smirks tugging at their lips. That was the night I learned the power of dismissal, that if enough people agreed to ignore you, it was almost like you never existed at all. Later that week, I found solace at my grandmother's house. She was the only one who ever seemed to notice when I disappeared into myself. She handed me a leather-bound journal, its pages blank and inviting. "Write, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice raspy but steady. "Write what they won't let you say. One day, you'll need these words more than you know." I clutched that journal like it was oxygen. And in the quiet of my room, I filled its pages with truths no one wanted to hear, my memories, my anger, my determination not to vanish. That journal was the first time I realized, if they wouldn't keep my story, I would. That journal became my anchor. Every night, after school, after the silence at home, after the sting of being ignored, I'd curl up on my bed with its pages. I wrote down everything. My memories, my pain, the little fragments of joy I could find. At first, it was just survival. But somewhere between those pages, I found my voice. By the time I was 18, I was desperate to leave. My parents brushed off my college applications, telling me it was a waste of time, that I should stay close, help out at home, maybe take classes at the community college if I had to. But I wanted more. With the help of a guidance counselor who saw my grades and my hunger, I earned a scholarship to a state university 3 hours away. I still remember the way my father's jaw tightened when I told him I was leaving. Don't expect us to pay for anything, he warned. My mother muttered something about me thinking I was too good for this family. Their words cut deep, but I packed my bags anyway. College wasn't easy. I worked late shifts at a coffee shop, sometimes walking home at 2 a.m. with blisters in my shoes. I wrote essays between classes, crammed for exams while my coworkers laughed on break. There were nights I cried so hard into my pillow that I thought my chest would cave in. But then I'd open my grandmother's journal and remember her words. Write what they won't let you say. One of my professors, Dr. Klein, noticed my writing. She was in her 60s, sharp-eyed, with silver hair always pinned in a bun. She pulled me aside after class one day, a stack of my essays in her hand. Emily, she said, do you know you have something rare? You don't just write, you cut straight to the truth. Don't waste that. Her belief lit a fire under me. She introduced me to an editor friend at a small local magazine. I started pitching articles, first about student life, then about bigger issues. Family, identity, memory. Rejection letters piled up at first, but every no taught me how to sharpen my words. And then one day, an email subject line made my heart stop. Accepted for publication. I was 21, sitting on my thin dorm mattress, staring at that email with tears streaming down my face. My words, my voice, were finally out in the world. From there, doors began to crack open. More articles, freelance opportunities, a growing portfolio. I learned how to budget, how to negotiate contracts, how to survive on ramen noodles when payments came late. I stumbled. I failed. I doubted myself. But every time I thought of quitting, I remembered how it felt to sit at that family dinner table, invisible. And I swore I would never let myself be erased again. I didn't tell my family much. On phone calls, I'd keep it vague. Things are fine. School is busy. I'm writing a little. I knew if I shared my wins, they'd find a way to diminish them. So I built my success quietly, brick by brick, in a world far from theirs. And with every published piece, with every check that covered rent and groceries, I realized something. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building a life they couldn't touch. Back in my mother's living room, the silence stretched thin after David's words. The photo album sat open on his lap, a glossy page of smiling faces that should have included me, but didn't. My mother's hand twitched as if she wanted to close the book, but David looked up, his gaze steady, protective. Emily, he said softly, but loud enough for everyone to hear. Why aren't you in these pictures? I felt my throat tighten. My instinct was to shrug it off, to laugh, to make it small. That's what I'd always done. But this time, something inside me shifted. Maybe it was the weight of David's hand slipping into mine, warm and grounding. Maybe it was the years of silence pressing against my ribs. Whatever it was, I couldn't stay quiet. I was there, I said, my voice low but firm. I remember those trips. I remember those birthdays. But if you're looking for me in those albums, you won't find me. Because they never put me in. A stunned hush fell over the room. Jacob frowned, leaning forward. That doesn't make sense. Why would Mom and Dad leave you out? I laughed, sharp and bitter. Why indeed? I rose from the couch, my heels clicking against the hardwood as I walked toward the mantel. Framed photos lined the shelf. Jacob in his football uniform, Hannah at her piano recital, family vacations frozen in time. I scanned them, my chest tightening with each one. Not a single photo of me. Do you know what it's like, I asked, turning back to them, to live in a house full of pictures and never see your own face? To be told you imagined your own memories? To start doubting whether you even existed? My mother's lips pressed into a thin line. Emily, don't dramatize. You always. No, my voice cut through hers, sharp as glass. Not this time. David stood then, placing the album on the table, his voice calm but unwavering. I've seen the proof of who Emily is. Her work, her achievements, her life. She's not invisible. You just chose not to see her. The room shifted. My father's face paled. Jacob looked confused. Hannah avoided my eyes. I walked toward the door that led into my study. With a steady hand, I pushed it open. If you want to see who I am, really see, then come in. They followed hesitantly, one by one, into the room that had become my sanctuary. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined the walls, filled with titles, many with my name on the spine. Awards and plaques gleamed softly under the light. A desk sat by the window, papers neatly stacked, a framed article from a New York Times hanging above it, my byline bold and undeniable. "This," I said, sweeping a hand around the room, "is my life. The one you ignored. The one you erased. While you pretended I wasn't there, I was building this." My father's mouth opened, then closed again. Hannah blinked rapidly, whispering, "You wrote all these?" "Yes." My voice cracked, but I straightened my shoulders. Every word, every late night, every fight to be heard. The world didn't erase me, you did. But I refused to disappear. The silence that followed was heavier than any words. My mother stared at the floor, her face unreadable. My father cleared his throat, but said nothing. Jacob rubbed the back of his neck, shifting uncomfortably. David slipped his arm around me, grounding me again. "Now they know," he murmured. And for the first time, I felt the weight of their disbelief turn into something else, something I couldn't quite name. Shame, maybe. Or awe. All I knew was this. The girl they tried to erase was standing right in front of them, unshakable. I let the silence linger, let them sit with the truth. For years, they had edited me out of their story. Tonight, they were standing inside mine. "I need you to understand something," I began, my voice steady. "I don't owe you an explanation. I don't owe you my success, my peace, or even my presence. But if you want to be in my life going forward, there are conditions." Jacob frowned. "Conditions? Come on, it's Christmas." "Exactly." I cut in, my eyes locking with his. "Christmas is supposed to be about truth, love, family, not lies and silence." David's hand tightened reassuringly around mine, but I didn't look at him. I wanted them to see my face, to see the woman they had ignored grow into someone who no longer flinched. I turned to my father first. His shoulders were squared, but his eyes darted away from mine. "If you want a relationship with me, you have to acknowledge what happened. No more pretending I wasn't there. No more rewriting the past. You will look me in the eye and say you were wrong." His jaw clenched, but he didn't argue. Then my gaze shifted to my mother. She stood rigid, arms folded tight across her chest. For years, she had been the loudest voice telling me to stay quiet. "Mom, if you want to be in my future, you will stop silencing me. You will listen, even when it's uncomfortable. You don't get to decide what parts of me are worth remembering." Her lips trembled, though she tried to hide it. I turned to Hannah. She looked small, sitting on the edge of the armchair, her hands twisting in her lap. "Hannah, you don't have to compete with me, and I don't have to compete with you. If you want a relationship, it has to be honest. No more smirks, no more looking away while they cut me down. You'll stand up for the truth, even if it's inconvenient." Finally, I faced Jacob. He opened his mouth as if to protest, but I raised a hand. "And you don't get to laugh off my pain anymore. If you want me in your life, you'll treat me like your sister. Not a ghost, not a joke. A sister." I drew in a slow breath, my heart pounding but my voice unshaken. "Each of you has a choice. If you can't do this, then you don't get me. Not a piece of me, not a holiday version of me, not the edited version you prefer. The real me or nothing." The room was heavy with silence again, but this time, I didn't shrink from it. I let it hang there, daring them to fill it with something other than denial. David kissed the top of my head. "That's more grace than they deserve," he whispered, but I shook my head. "It's not about them deserving it," I said softly but firmly. "It's about me protecting the life I fought for." The next morning, the house felt different. Not healed, not fixed, but lighter, somehow. Like the truth had cracked open a window that had been shut for years. My father was the first to speak. Over coffee, he cleared his throat, his voice rough. "Emily, I was wrong." The words were stiff, clumsy, but they were real. "You were there." "I should've." He stopped, shaking his head, unable to finish. But for once, The silence between us wasn't denial. It was effort. Hannah slipped into the kitchen later, eyes red-rimmed. "I read your book last night," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I stayed up until 3 a.m. I didn't know." Her words broke, and she pressed a hand over her mouth. When she finally looked at me, her eyes weren't competitive anymore. They were open. "I'm sorry." Even Jacob, awkward as ever, muttered, "Guess I was kind of a jerk, huh?" He scratched the back of his neck, forcing a grin. "I'll work on that." It wasn't much, but it was a start. My mother lingered the longest. She hovered at the doorway, her expression tight, like she was fighting an invisible war inside herself. Finally, she whispered, "I don't know how to make this right." I studied her face, the same face that had dismissed me, silenced me, pretended I wasn't there. And for the first time, I didn't feel the desperate ache for her approval. I simply felt free. "You start," I said gently, "by listening." Later that evening, when the house was quiet again, I pulled out the journal my grandmother had given me all those years ago. Its leather cover was worn soft from my hands, its pages swollen with ink and time. I flipped through the entries, the angry ones, the lonely ones, the hopeful ones. Her handwriting was still on the inside cover. "Write what they won't let you say." I traced the letters with my finger, my chest tightening. She had been right. That journal had saved me. It had carried me through silence and dismissal until I could stand in front of my family and demand to be seen. For the first time in years, I wrote a new entry, not about pain, but about power. About how a girl once erased had carved herself back into the story. And when I closed the journal, I knew the truth with absolute certainty. This time, my story is mine, and I'm finally in the picture.